Happy Sunday, everyone. So here we are, week 11. I'm about to head to the gym Sunday, getting a deload week in, so it's going to be a nice, easy week. And I'm watching all the St. Patty's Day people running around looking to get absolutely drunk, carrying cases of beer all around. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is carbohydrates, essentially. So something that a number of my clients and I have been talking about this week. The first thing, that squirrel doesn't have a tail. Jesus. Okay, so a number of my fat loss clients, their primary goal is fat loss, and the biggest driver of fat loss is nutrition, which if you have talked to me for any length of time ever before, you've probably heard that at some point. But one of the things that I've noticed with a number of them is that culturally it has been drilled into them that they have this template in their mind for what makes a meal, and having a starch at every meal is kind of like a rule that they live by. So every single time that they're eating, they're having potatoes or rice or bread or pasta or, I don't know, some sort of starch. And so we want to understand a couple of things about carbohydrates here, and maybe sort out some mythology behind them as well. So you may have heard things like carbohydrates are, essential to a healthy diet, and maybe that your brain absolutely requires glucose. Let's just start there. So the first thing that we want to talk about is carbohydrates are able to be stored in your body. I think that's a pretty important thing because unlike protein, we don't need necessarily to get carbohydrates at every single meal because we can, fill up our gas tank and drive, across the state and not have to fill our gas tank up every 10 minutes. We can keep going, and then we can fill it up, at our leisure when we feel like it, and we'll be absolutely fine. So we store carbohydrates, store them in our livers, we store them in our muscles, and so that helps to determine how much carbohydrate can you store. So if you're a really, really large person, and you weigh 300 pounds of muscle, and you're just an absolute gorilla, you can probably store a whole lot more carbohydrates than you would if you're a 5-foot tall petite woman, or a child even. So a smaller body cannot store as many carbohydrates. That's number one. So it's also dependent on, the way we use carbohydrates is also dependent on how much activity we use. So it's kind of the same sort of thing. So if we can store carbohydrates, then how fast are we depleting them? We can use the car analogy again. So if you fill your gas tank up and you're commuting an hour back and forth from work every day, you're going to use a whole lot more of your fuel, your carbohydrate in this case, than if you were to just take it out on the weekends or, drive 10 minutes to work every day and you don't have as long of a commute. So if we don't need carbohydrates at every meal and we can store them for later, then what happens when we do eat them at every meal? So let's talk a little bit briefly about insulin. So every time we eat carbohydrates, we're going to get an insulin response because our blood sugar is going to go up. Blood sugar is going to go up. We're going to get an insulin response. And one of the things that insulin does is it kind of shuts down fat burning, basically. So every time that you eat carbohydrates, you're telling your body, hey, we want to store this stuff and tuck it away. If you are already at the top of your stores, then it's likely going to be converted to fat because we're already stored. So we have this excess energy. We need to store it somehow. So why don't we just store it as fat? That is, if you're not using it. So if you are not exercising a ton or training for a special event, say marathon running or anything like that, where you would need a much higher level of carbohydrates, then your stores are going to really not dwindle down very quickly, and you have that 10-minute commute versus the 1-hour commute. So you probably won't need as many carbohydrates in every meal, 5 minutes right there. So bottom line on this one is, do you really need carbohydrates at every meal? Think again, how do you feel if you were to just eat everything but carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, vegetables, meat, and fat? What happens if you feel, or how do you feel if you don't eat carbohydrates at a meal? Talk next time.